Questions for reflection. St. John is rightly called the beloved disciple in the Christian tradition for a good reason. His gospel and his letters to the early church reveal a depth of theology which came from an intimate communion with the Lord in prayer. He was a witness to the resurrection. Not only did he walk with the Lord, rest his head on the chest of Christ during the last meal, stand at the second tree, the cross on Golgotha's hill, right next to the mother of the Lord, but he rushed to the tomb and witnessed the implications of the triumph of love over death. John is the disciple of that love which is stronger than death, the love of the risen and glorified Jesus Christ, love incarnate. The best definition of a theologian I have discovered is taken from the writings of a first-century monk named Evagrius of Pontus. He wrote that a theologian is someone who, quote, rests his head on the chest of Christ. The image calls to mind the beloved disciple John, depicted as doing just that in early Christian art. Evagrius also wrote that a theologian is one who prays, and one who prays is a theologian. St. John, the beloved disciple, was just such a great theologian because he was in an ongoing, intimate communion with Jesus. He really, really prayed. Do we? Well, it helps to dig deeper into what prayer is, the kind of prayer which is encountering the Lord. As someone who's pursued years of graduate theology and still trying to finish a doctoral degree, I'm certainly not opposed to academic theological study. However, the heart of good theology, the fire that fuels living faith, is an ongoing encounter with the risen Lord Jesus, cultivated as an ongoing experience through prayer. Without such an encounter, I do not know how anyone can do theology at all. For John the Beloved, that communion continued after the resurrection, because Jesus is still truly present in his glorified life to all those who live in the encounter, which lies at the heart of being a Christian. The risen Jesus comes to be with us in every Eucharist, in his word, in the intimate life of living prayer. John knew Jesus personally and lived in an intimate communion with him, the kind that only comes through prayer. We can do so as well. The choice is ours. David the psalmist was also a man of deep prayer. In our response today, he reminds us the Lord, quote, rescues the needy who calls to him, and the poor who has no one to help. He has pity on the weak and the needy, and saves the needy from death, end quote. We are the needy. We need to acknowledge that and call upon him. He will hear us, and he will respond. The gospel appointed for today's Mass is a continuation of St. Mark's account of the multiplication of the loaves and fish, the feeding of the 5,000. The next day, after the miracle of the loaves, the instruction and the experience continued. We find the disciples in the boat fishing. We find Jesus praying. Their placement in the boat in the story was a favorite image for the early church fathers. It was seen as a figure of the Ark of the Old Covenant and the Ark of the New Covenant, the church. It is this church, this communion of persons joined in Jesus through baptism, which he came to found, and over which he would later install these men in apostolic office. It is this church of which we are members, which continues his redemptive mission until he returns. That's one of the many reasons why this lesson is so vitally important to learn. The disciples needed to, quote, understand about the loaves. And so do we. In fact, we need to learn to live the miracle in our own daily lives. This kind of understanding only comes from communion with the Father and the Son through the Spirit. It is the fruit of a living, dynamic, and authentic Christian faith. Jesus invited the disciples to believe that when they have him, they have everything. Yet here in a storm, they fled to the familiar, the fear of the circumstances. So powerful were their fears that they prevented them from even recognizing God incarnate as he passed right before them. They thought he was a ghost. How crippling our own fears can become when we do not commune in prayer, but rely on ourselves and our mere human efforts. They had not understood about the loaves. Do we? Like those disciples, we're invited to live our lives now in and with the Lord. He's been raised from the dead, and he continues his work in and through his body, the church, of which we're members. Faith is a light that's meant to preside over our entire lives, even during the storms that inevitably come. When faith does preside, we see Jesus right there in the midst of the storm, right there with us. And we come to experience authentic peace, even in apparent turmoil, as we learn to navigate the waters of daily life. The Lord heard the cry of the poor as it issued from the mouths of his own disciples, and he spoke these beautiful words. Listen to them. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.